Hello, everyone. This is Andrew Henry. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to just take a few seconds here, allow for our attendees to join, and then we will get started here in less than a minute. But I appreciate everybody making the time. Should have a lively discussion today. Okay, so thanks again. So today we are here to discuss a persistent and important topic within the private equity realm, and that topic is CFO talent. We all know the impact of great CFOs. It's widely understood and certainly coveted. However, finding and consistently unleashing CFO talent is something that is both a significant challenge as well as an opportunity. So during our discussion today, we are going to address the full talent life cycle, from recruiting to onboarding, retention, and of course, value creation. To best offer insights, I've invited several experts to join me in the discussion who will offer their perspective and experiences. We hope during today's discussion, you're able to gain insights which can shape your thinking and that you can utilize to your advantage going forward. We certainly encourage everyone to put forward their questions in the chat, and towards the end of our discussion today, we will be happy to respond to your questions. We'll start by introducing our panel. I'll start. My name is Andrew Henry. I'm managing partner here at JM Search. JM Search is an executive search firm that is deeply focused within the private equity sector. Not surprisingly, CFO searches are our #1 assignment each and every year. I've been in search for 30 years now, and my focus is within healthcare. I'm joined today by Alice Mann from Mann Partners, by Sagit Halpern from Pamlico Capital, by Adam Marcotte from FMG Leading, and Brian Dwyer from JM Search. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to please introduce themselves. Alice, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. I'm very happy to be here, Andrew. I'm Alice Mann, and I'm the founder of Mann Partners, which is a boutique consulting firm focused on private equity, human capital, and organization design. And we work with private companies and investors on building great teams and organizations and collaborating with boards, investors, and management teams.
Thank you, Alice. Sagit, would you mind going next?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Sagit Halpern, and I work for Pamlico Capital as a financial operations advisor. Pamlico Capital is a private equity that invests primarily in founder-led small to mid-sized businesses. And in my role, I lead our finance operations, which means I support the CFOs and the finance teams of the companies that we invest in.
Great. Thank you. Adam, would you mind going next?
Of course. Thank you, Andrew. Good to be here. Thank you to JM Search and Hunt Scanlon for this topic. My name is Adam Marcotte. I'm a managing principal with FMG Leading. We are a human capital strategy firm, and we help organizations really overcome the business challenges that they're facing as they grow and as they scale. And we do this primarily through the human capital lens, working with strategic alignment amongst leaders, teams, talent, and culture.
Thank you, Adam. Brian, would you mind providing an introduction?
Great, thanks, Andrew. Yes, Brian Dwyer here with JM Search. I'm a partner in our CFO practice. Our practice is exclusively focused on placing CFOs, almost predominantly for private equity-backed businesses.
Great, thank you. So let's dive into questions for the panel, and let's start with recruitment. So there are certain situations where recruiting a CFO is obvious. You've had a resignation. There's a clear reason. Other times it's perhaps not so clear. So interested to hear from the panel your experience. How do you know when it's time to consider bringing in a new CFO?
Well, I can jump in. So having worked inside of private equity firms and seeing that kind of deliberation that happens, it's often a process. It's not an event or a moment. And sometimes it starts with, a business is underperforming, financial reporting is slow. There may be some talent issues in terms of the team as well, all of those things, or the CEO partnership with the CFO, may have challenges, and all of those things I think get deliberated on for a while before a change would be made. There's lots of other instances I know my colleagues on with me today can talk about, but that's what I've seen.
I can share a few stories of what we have seen. So as Andrew mentioned, there's the obvious instances, but there are also instances where it is less obvious. So as an example, we had a situation where we had a CFO joining a finance team that had really high turnover prior to them joining. It is also a very inorganic thesis in that company, meaning they're constantly buying more and more companies. And the goal for the CFO was really to build the team as well as system infrastructure to be able to support this M&A growth thesis. The CFO was very, very strong, very quickly understood the business, became a great partner from a strategic perspective to the rest of the executive team. But as 1, 2, 3 years went by, it became more and more apparent that we are lacking the actual goal, and we still have high turnover in the team. We do not have a strong infrastructure. So when we think about being able to provide the insights that the board and the rest of the executive management team, even thinking about what we would need to provide as we go to exit, that is lacking. And in this situation, it took a very long time and a lot of deliberations, like Alice was referring to. It's not a one-day decision, because you're looking between someone that's really strategic, but on the other hand, you had very clear goals that unfortunately were not met.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe to add to that, Sagit, I think some of the things we see from a recruiting process when it comes to matching the right skill sets is the importance of alignment at the board level early, as to what the responsibilities and really the vision for the company look like going forward. Where we see things maybe not go so well is where there's maybe a disconnect at the board level or with the CEO and private equity sponsor. Those dynamics tend to affect the success or outcome of a search. And so where we see things go well is when there's good collaboration early in a process to identify what are the key skill sets needed for the individual. So those are times where we think things are going well, and times where we think things might be challenged, or when there's lack of collaboration or communication around those areas.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think as Alice and Sagit offered, right, sometimes it's not just a moment in time, it's a process or it takes time to unfold. And Brian, you touched on it that getting that alignment when it is time is really important. I'm interested. The types of CFOs really can vary greatly, and the steps to match the CFO profile are really important. I don't know if there's any other thoughts that the panel has seen that when that you need a CFO and you really need to match it and get it right. I don't know if there's any other thoughts about a process that could be helpful to match the right CFO for the value creation plan of the business.
Well, it's interesting, Andrew. I think that and that can also change over time. I think to your first question, sometimes somebody comes in and matches the situation, and then you need a strategic CFO, or you need a turnaround CFO, or you need an operationally focused CFO. And so that could change over time. But I think, of course, it's very important to get aligned up front that it's, it's not one size fits all. And that especially in private equity, a CFO really has to match the situation. And so there's the sort of technical skills around that need to match the size of the business, the industry, the maturity. I mean, sometimes in middle market, you'll see big companies that still have a lot of infrastructure building to do, and a CFO needs to be able to get in there, roll up their sleeves, and kind of build a team and systems, a new ERP, or maybe big integration projects to do. So all those things, I think, really laying those out clearly and looking at whether that person has a track record of doing those things before. And then to Brian's point earlier, like the relationships matter so much, and you have so many different stakeholders who have a stake in the success of the CFO, and that, being able to build those relationships, get along with those people, and be kind of a translator between, the management team and the board, are all critical skills.
Great. I'm interested also to hear, oftentimes when you see the requirements for a new CFO, there's an emphasis around the hard skills, experiential skills. They need to be a CPA. They need to have strong M&A experience. They need to have private equity experience, things of that nature. But I'm interested to understand what you see in terms of other skills that you see that may be important for CFOs, specifically within private equity. Are there other skills other than the hard skills, the experiential skills that you think are important and that should be, a part of that profile building?
Andrew, I think that's a really important question. And as we have seen a lot of businesses that go through that natural evolution over time, I think it's particularly relevant, in particular within private equity backed organizations. We've seen that need to move really from the tactical pieces that a CFO has to bring to the table to really evolving much more to a strategic mindset and being that strategic thought partner for the CEO, helping them to think about growth and that setting that long-term vision and the overall strategy beyond just the financials. And a lot of times for a CFO, that includes becoming much more involved in the operations. It includes understanding the culture of the organization. It understands what the product or the service of the delivery of the company is. And so CFOs can play a really, really critical role in setting that tone and helping to shape the culture and really being a strategic thought partner with the CEO and ultimately with the board. So it does go beyond the tactical skills, and I think evolves much more into that strategic thought partner.
Great.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry. Yeah, I think, somebody who has a high sense of urgency working in private equity is pretty critical. But and a lot of times the CFO has to work across the organization to help other functions be more impactful or more effective with what they're doing, right? They are the center of information a lot of times for what's happening in the organization. And they're a conduit for, sales, ops, the CEO, the private equity sponsor to really understand how to make decisions. So the ability to effectively communicate across an organization becomes pretty critical. At least we've seen that be a big piece of what a lot of our private equity sponsors are trying to understand about somebody's ability beyond the technical piece is how are they going to inform the organization and support the other functional areas in a way that's going to add value to their other functions in the business.
Yeah.
Brian, I agree. And I think that so much of that is sense making, the narrative around making sense of the data that is available, going after the data, putting it together and helping people translate that, whether it's operational KPIs, sales data, financial metrics, and then making sense of that to the board. And I think so, often in private equity, the CFO, will understand kind of the financial structure really well and be able to translate that to people who need to be able to act on it.
Yeah.
Alice, I couldn't agree with you more. Just to build on that real quick, I think a lot of times in those fast-paced, private equity environments, CFOs can be seen as the financial police, or sometimes they're called the CFO, because they're managing all of the budget so closely. But you're absolutely right that being a good partner across all the functions and helping to be that translator can be a real critical factor to not just a CFO success, but really the overall organizational success. Just stepping out of that financial police role, or the eye only on the budget, but helping to be a cultural translator.
Right. Which really it's around people skills, communication skills, collaboration skills, so much more, right, than oftentimes is focused on. Really interesting. I want to now pivot and talk about the onboarding process, right? You've decided to hire a CFO, you've found the right profile, you've hired that individual, and now it's time to bring them on board in the organization. It's such a vital step to success, but yet sometimes it seems like the onboarding process can be a little bit overlooked or maybe undervalued in terms of its impact. And so I'm just interested to hear from the panel, maybe examples where you've seen onboarding go well, and perhaps any best practices, or maybe even situations where you've seen onboarding be overlooked and not turn out as it should.
Yeah, it's funny, Andrew, because it's very connected to your first question about when do you replace the CFO, and often it's with a sense of urgency. So somebody gets thrown in the deep end and they have got to, act very quickly, and as you said, onboarding then gets overlooked. I'm a big believer that, it's a two-way street, and that, owning your own career path means also setting up the onboarding that you need to be successful, and advocating for that to your new employer. And so where I've seen people be really successful, and it's not one size fits all. I mean, some people need a very structured plan, and that's just how they operate, and they'll need a structured plan for everything else that they do too. And some people really just need to get out there and talk to a whole bunch of people and take in a bunch of new information. But knowing yourself and knowing what you need to onboard well, and then, laying out the plan, getting the time to do that. For some people, that may mean traveling. It may mean spending a lot of time with their team. And so I think a good employer will also, the CEO will help them kind of get that time to articulate what it is that they need to onboard well. And
Great.
I would also add that I think, the myth of culture fit is that you can bring in, a mature executive and they're just going to fit into the company automatically. And that's a good hire. Like, that to me is a total myth. I think that, somebody actually needs to acclimate to a new culture. And so understanding that, taking the time to learn, and, kind of both ways, and then also making the rest of the team, like the CEO can make the rest of the team, help to own the success of that new person. And I've seen that happen a lot, in private equity. It's like, if everybody helps to own and helps then to onboard and has a part in it, it goes much better.
Well,
I think we've also seen an opportunity before somebody's hired to even start that onboarding process. And in some search processes, where there's a 30, 60, 90-day plan, part of, it's really part of the interview, but it's also an opportunity for candidates to get, a better understanding of what's going on in the organization. And it also allows for, the company to understand how somebody might think or tackle an objective, or, when they collaborate in that scenario, they're able to align on priorities. And so it gives an opportunity to get into the minds of how you might work together, and maybe if there's gaps, how you might need to solve for that from an onboarding perspective. So I think we've seen onboarding more successful when there's an earlier engagement in some of the things that that need to be tackled by the CFO. So from a recruiting perspective, when that happens, we tend to see a better transition.
yeah.
I agree with Alice and Brian. I think there's also a couple of other things that can be done. First, there's a big difference between a CFO that's been there, done that, to a new CFO. so as you go into defining, and that maybe even goes before into the recruitment, into what your needs are, you can also start thinking about the onboarding based on that profile. Is it going to be a new CFO that may need more mentoring? For example, we offer ongoing weekly, bi-weekly, based on the need, mentorship to our CFOs, especially if they are new CFOs, first-time CFOs coming into the role.
Yeah.
Another thing that Brian touched on is the plan. What are the goals? So part of what we do is not only ask the candidate, but we actually do an assessment of our own, of the company, to put our goals together. And we sort of put a roadmap of short-term, long-term, required, nice to have, etc. over time, that we work with the CEO as part of the recruiting process and the onboarding process. And then at the right time, we also share it with the CFO. It's very collaborative to let them, agree whether they think these are the right things or not, but it just helps with that alignment and the onboarding to make sure there's a path to success.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, yeah, sorry, Andrew, to jump in, but there's two other perspectives that I'm thinking about too, building on what we've talked about. Kind of dovetailing with the first question, I think it's really important that as a CFO is onboarding into the organization, in order to understand the context of what they're stepping into, it's really important that they're also spending time getting to know those other functions, maybe spending time in the field or in the office, just building relationships. I think it's really critical and important with all of the CFOs that I've coached over the years, that they're spending time building relationships so that people get to know them first and foremost as a person, and not just the name behind the spreadsheet or the approval request form. So I think that that's an important thing. But then going the other direction, I also think organizations can play a more active role in onboarding the CFO, in building a relationship with the board or with the sponsor. Having a really good relationship and a strong partnership with the board and your sponsor is a really critical factor to success for CFOs. They have to, by definition, the board or your PE sponsor is going to probably be asking you some provocative questions to push the organization or to challenge the executive team. A CFO that isn't set up properly with a good onboarding and relationship introduction might take that in somewhat of a defensive manner. When you look at it as a partnership, it can really be this accretive symbiotic relationship where one is helping to push the other and then driving the organization. So I think that can sometimes get overlooked as well during the onboarding phase.
I know there's some questions coming, and but there's a couple questions about the CEO CFO relationship, and I think that is so important. And I think that again it's almost like looking at understanding the situation. The CEO is part of the situation that you need to hire the CFO for, right? So sometimes it's balancing things that the CEO does or doesn't do well. And then also there's a question about an interim CEO. Like if you have an interim CEO, that's another unique situation. And that's why I think, again, going back to really spending the time to assess the situation that you're hiring for is important. Yeah.
And we definitely we're going to get to the questions. Please keep the questions coming. We'll get to them at the end of the session today. Great points about onboarding. I'm interested in that vein. Coaching is increasingly a resource that you see utilized for CFOs to help them be successful. And I'm just interested from the panel, just any comments that you've seen about the impact that coaching has had, the role that it can play. If the people on the panel advocate for that as a tool that's to be used, just would love to get your impressions on coaching as a means to set individuals up for success and value creation.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that real quick. Having had the opportunity to coach a lot of CFOs over the years, I granted I'm biased, but I do think it plays a really critical role, because not only in the incoming first 90, 100 days can a coach really help interpret the business, the context, and get, a CFO set with a strong foundation, getting clear in goals, but also some of those other things that we just talked about in terms of building relationships across the organization, how you strengthen the relationship with the other executive team members, how you enter correctly and effectively. Like all of that is a critical function. For those that are further along in their career, or maybe not just coming in through the onboarding phase, but who've already been there, coaching can also play a really important role in helping them stretch and level up to get to that next stretch goal, that next level of their own career. And that can look like a lot of different things. A lot of times a coach can help you interpret what that might be, what that might look like, and also serve as an interface with the CEO or other key stakeholders.
Great. Thank you.
I think just one word about coaching, I think that's really important. It's just there's a lot of different versions of coaching out there. And so just as a consumer of coaching, I think it's important to know what some of those different types are. And I think coaching someone in an onboarding transition is a particular thing, and people do it differently, but like that is a more structured type of coaching. That's a particular period of time and experience, and getting people outside their comfort zone in terms of maybe building relationships that they wouldn't otherwise, or being strategic about how they engage the organization, getting feedback early on, things like that are going to be critical with that type of coaching, which is different than other types of either executive coaching or advisory coaching that can help somebody long-term be successful in a role.
Great point. And I want to now switch to talking about retention. And I know in talking with the panel leading up to this conversation today, I know that there's a lot of sentiment from the panel that really retention is really tantamount to engagement and challenge, right? And that the more somebody's challenged, likely the more that they may be engaged, and obviously that has a direct correlation back to retention. So I'm interested to just hear strategies and observations from the panel about keeping CFOs challenged, engaged, and in the process keeping them with an organization.
Best way to retain a CFO is to have the business perform well. Best way to lose the CFO is have the business not perform well.
Yeah, I will add to that at the risk of maybe over stereotyping a little bit, but with the range of CFOs that I've worked with, it can largely come down to, like you said, Andrew, giving them a bit of a challenge. Many times CFOs have developed the technical skills, the reporting, the FP&A function, et cetera, to really master their craft. But what's next? What's the next intellectual challenge? And in my experience, most CFOs really appreciate that intellectual challenge, and also broadening their set of responsibilities that they have within the organization. Sometimes that can mean taking on additional functions, like maybe an operations advisory role, or even operations itself, and getting involved there. But depending on the maturity and the place of evolution of the business, it could also be starting to get involved in M&A work or the diligence work, which is a whole different skill set and a whole new level that CFOs might be going to. And so I think the more that there's an opportunity to challenge intellectually and stretch their skills and give more responsibilities, the more likely you are to retain top talent CFO. And that also then kind of has an implicit assumption in it that there is a growth trajectory for the organization as well. Having a CFO be able to take that strategic partnership role with the CEO is a big factor in that, and being able to help shape that future direction and long-term vision of the company. So those are a few tactics that I've seen that have worked.
Right. And there's also a growth trajectory. Just to comment quickly, there's a growth trajectory for the CFO themselves, right? Some would ultimately aspire to be CEO. Maybe some ultimately aspire to sit on a board, right? And so if they feel like they're being challenged and they feel like they're growing, and of course they're contributing to the organization, appropriately, right? That's gonna energize them and keep them around. Sagit, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna add that both you and Adam, as well as maybe a little bit of the question itself, talks about how to keep the CFO challenged. I would turn that around a little bit and also talk about how does the CFO keep herself or himself challenged. Because honestly, I've been a PCFO and I have yet to meet one that is not challenged. It's a pretty difficult role. And part of it, going back to what we discussed before about being the translator, about being that focal point of information and collaboration, as you grow into that role, as you develop those relationship, not just with the board, but also with the executive team that you're working with, the CEO, but the rest of the executive team as well. You, as a CFO, are going to see a lot of different things that maybe are working and maybe are not working within the company. And a lot of it is up to you. How do you get more involved? How do you find your voice and your ability to affect change in those areas? And that is always very challenging and interesting.
Great point. Great point. I want to now talk about team building. So like any executive, right, a CFO's success will depend in large degree the ability of their ability to bring in a high performing team. And so interested to hear examples where you've seen team building done right, any lessons learned. I think there are some unique facets of hiring for CFO versus other parts of the organization. So would love to hear from the panel about their experience and advice when it comes to building a high-performing team.
I do think that what we were saying before is, to keep a CFO, they also need to be able to invest in a team. And so I think it's dependent, so a lot of the things that Sagit and Adam talked about require then the CFO to not be doing everything themselves. So I think that's just one thing for the management team to think about. But in terms of experiences that I've seen, I've seen CFOs, not do well because of their team, because of the people that they brought in, because of, and some of that is their ability to hire and support those people to be good business partners. And I'm thinking particularly of a company that was a roll-up of other companies, which is very common in private equity. And you have, you're bringing in all these other financial professionals and integrating them into a function. And then you've got to turn around and serve these legacy businesses. If they don't like the person that you put out there to serve them, like that could, that can be a downfall of a CFO, is creating that good business partner on their team.
Yeah,
I think that, no, go ahead, Brian, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to just piggyback a bit there. A lot of times, particularly in that scenario, Alice, CFOs are inheriting a team. They're inheriting, lots of times, maybe unsophisticated or unprofessionalized people that are part of that team, and they need to navigate how to work with that group. At the same time, think about how to top grade or upgrade as they can. And I think, a lot of clients who are looking for a CFO want somebody who can come in and do a lot, and they can, be the doer to do what maybe can't get done by a particular team or team member. But I think where things have worked out well or better is when there's been more of a collaborative effort up front, where you're talking about what the future state of the business looks like, and an understanding that a CFO is likely going to have to build at some point. It may not be in the first 6 months, it may not be in the first year, but at some point you're going to scale to a point where you're going to need to bring in some support to really move the needle faster. And so I think the earlier that conversation can be had at the board level or with the CFO and CEO, and with the sponsor, I think just helps start to plan for how to navigate that when the time comes. Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Yeah, you're making a point that is perfect to build on. A lot of the CEOs that we work with, we hear all the time, I wish that my executive team could think more strategically and get out of the weeds. And that's like one of the number one wishes that we hear from CEOs, especially in a fast-paced private equity environment. And the fact is, one of the only ways that you can do that is, for example, through the CFO lens, is if they have a strong team that's behind them that allows them to elevate and be able to work at that level. Otherwise, you're not going to get them operating at the top of their license because they're too busy doing everything, which is what Alice mentioned. And so having a plan for that and being able to top grade that is certainly important in order for the CFO to elevate and do the things that only she or he are really capable of. But there's another benefit of that too, and it goes down through the organization, which is you have the sub functions underneath the CFO, such as your RCM or your FP&A, your accounting, and they interface with all of the other functions across the organization, whether it's gathering data, providing reports, providing insights, et cetera. The more you have a strong team there that is building that cross-functional collaboration and helping to share what the priorities of the business are, enable the other functions to go deliver their core purpose, the more likely the organization overall is going to be successful. So it's not just freeing the CFO up to do their highest and best, but it's really enabling the other functions across the organization to operate effectively. And that comes down to how strong is the team under the CFO.
Yeah. Great point, right? Because they serve the entire organization, right? And not only in hiring, I not only elevate and allow the opportunity for my CFO to become more strategic, but for the CFO's peers to have perhaps become more strategic because they're helping to elevate their counterpart organizations. Great point. Last topic, and we'll get to questions here in a moment, but is about value creation, right? In private equity, there's an intense focus on value creation. There's short periods of time. The CEO, the board, the investors, they're all maniacally focused on it. But interested when you think about the role of the CFO and value creation and perhaps the unique levers that they might be able to contribute to when it comes to the overall value creation. Interested as to, what you all see there, and perhaps if there's any misconceptions of what CFOs can do to impact value creation and those things that are uniquely in their control.
I'm happy to jump in here. I worked for a company and our tagline was right data, right now. And as I was thinking about this question, I really thought that that's a good tagline for how a CFO could bring value creation, because the role of the CFO is to create insights in real time across the organization so that the rest of the executive teams and the teams across the company could have the understanding of the risks and the opportunities, and then being able to operate based on those. So that could be around building metrics, not, as discussed before, not just financial metrics, operational metrics, hiring metrics, recruiting metrics, etc., whatever is required for the organization. And by doing that and helping everyone understand what are the growth leading indicators and what are the profitability drivers, that CFO can really help the value creation.
Great point, Sagit.
I think there's also, Alice, please go ahead.
No, you go.
I think that beyond a lot of the technical capabilities and where value's added just through some of the blocking and tackling of an organization, but also as you get into more mature systems and organizations that are starting to think about M&A or diligence processes, there's a lot of obvious value creation there. But I think an area that's often overlooked, and we talked about this a little bit already, is the role that the CFO can play as being a translator of the overall strategic and growth narrative of the organization, a lot of times by empowering other people within the organization. And I'm thinking in particular, there was one company that we were working with in healthcare, and a very rapidly scaling healthcare organization that was, a multi-site distributed care, trying to provide access to different populations around the country where healthcare is not as readily available. And every quarter, the CFO would give, the reports and the updates on the financials and how the organization was performing. And in one meeting in particular, they had all their leaders gathered, and the CFO, before getting up and starting kind of a state of the financials piece, what he did was he talked about the impact that the business has on patients and how much that meant to him, and how that was a big deal of why he signed on to this particular company, was because it was the organization was providing greater care, greater quality at a lower cost to more people. And that was something that was really compelling to him. all of the feedback after that meeting came back about how moving it was to hear the CFO, which is uncharacteristic, again, by a little bit of a stereotype, hearing a CFO tell a story like that. And for him in that moment, being able to link the mission and the overall growth strategy to a personal feeling and experience was a huge motivator for people. And they understood, started to understand that, the old line of, no margin, no mission. And I think he was able to help explain that in a way by telling a personal story. So I think a CFO can really add value by also being a cultural ambassador, by being a translator and helping to explain in non-financial terms why grow? Why does growth matter?
Great story.
Yeah. And I think just to build on that, I think being a change leader is a huge opportunity in middle market companies that are, private equity owned, are often going through a lot of transformation. So being able to be, wear an executive hat and I've worked with CFOs on, big initiatives to fix turnover or, organization design or integration. Those are all value creating strategic change initiatives that they can play a big role in, that, is that there's a financial component, but there's obviously a bigger kind of strategic and change leadership component.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think we may be all saying something similar, but yeah, the words that come to mind are business partner, right? Being a business partner as a financial leader, right? Understanding how you as a financial leader can affect or impact the rest of the business, right? And I think that, if as a CFO is able to be the person that can provide enough insight to make quick strategic decisions alongside the rest of the executive team, it really is a place that starts to create a lot of value. Where that's missing, it tends to be, an opportunity where people are looking for an upgrade or top grading in that scenario. So I think that those are usually areas that tend to impact the business in a positive way when you have somebody in that chair.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we have a number of questions that have come in from the guests today. So I'm going to ask the panel these. So first question is the criticality of the CFO and the CEO being on the same page. And so the question is, how during the interview process do you ensure that when you're hiring a CFO that will be a good pairing with the CEO?
We'll definitely have them interview. But I think also the self-awareness of the CEO, matters. It's choosing a business partner, helping to choose a business partner. You got to know yourself, to start with, and what you need, what your strengths and opportunities are, and what's going to be complementary to you. Because, often they're usually the decider, at least a big decider. And so they've got to choose wisely.
Yeah, and I'll chime in. I think that there's such good data that can be ascertained from references from people that have worked with that prior CFO, and including their past CEO oftentimes, right? And it's really digging into that data and understanding when did that when did that CFO perform best? Where did they struggle, and where did you need to support them? How did you find that they responded? I've certainly found that through formal assessments and through deep referencing, you can really get a little bit of a playbook of how that CFO is going to operate. And then as CEO, understand, hey, is this somebody who I think that I can work really easily with, and is their style going to complement my style? So I certainly think that digging in on that available information from references is, I think, a big key to understanding if you're going to have a good match or not.
Yeah, I would echo that, Andrew. Couldn't emphasize that enough too. I mean, the relationship with the CEO is just such a critical one. And when that partnership is strong, usually you start to see the ripple effect throughout the rest of the executive team and the rest of the organization. So Some of it is a skill match, like Alice was saying, and understanding for a CEO to know maybe where they are technically not as strong, and a good CFO could come in and supplement. And then it's also, again, on the people side, like you were mentioning, that doing some kind of a value creation forecast where you start to understand what is it going to take, what do you need to wrap around the CFO for them to be successful, what's it going to take, what other resources or support are they going to need, and making sure that the CEO and CFO are having a pretty candid conversation about that in the interview process, because it is such a close and critical partnership.
Great. The next question, we talked a lot in our discussion about, allowing a CFO to elevate and to add strategic value. One of the questions here, which I think is a very good one, is, what are ways that you can vet and understand a CFO's strategic capabilities and their effectiveness, and in the interview process, how do you identify people that have that strategic skill set that would be needed? So I think it's really understanding, do you have somebody that does have strong strategic capabilities is the heart of the question. So interested to hear the panel's feedback. I'm sure when you all have assessed CFOs, you may have a great tactical CFO, but do they have that strategic skill set? So interested to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think when we're interviewing for that particular component, a lot of it comes back to Andrew, what you suggested, which is a lot of referencing to understand sort of where from other people's perspective they added value in sort of the strategic decision-making process. But I think really understanding where they were involved in some critical areas of change and change management, and where they were driving these initiatives, and leading people through some fairly substantial uplift in sort of change management is a good way to sort of pressure test sort of what particular things they were tasked with owning and running. And again, it's, when you're in the weeds with somebody is really when I think you start to understand how they're going to operate in tough and stressful dynamics. And so for us, it's referencing people that were closest to them in those situations to understand how they did.
And definitely asking somebody to describe and break down the businesses that they've worked for. You can tell how strategically they think about and understand the business. And you can also, even asking them, about the financials, you can tell how they think about and how, how expert they are with their financials. And that is something obviously you need to assess with every CFO, but the strategic part of it, you can really tell in an interview or in an assessment.
I was recently coaching a CFO through an application process, actually, and the organization had provided her with a case study that she had to work through. And so case studies are oftentimes a good way to do it, where you're assessing not only what are their quantitative skills for understanding some of the unit metrics, but also starting to ask questions about trends in the marketplace of that particular industry, or what the impact and potential impact of certain market trends might be, and how they would staff their team accordingly, things like that. I'm not an interviewing expert, but I find that a lot of times, almost, Alice, I think what you were saying too, that if you ask a certain question in a particular way, it's looking to see and listening for how deep they go into what are some of the root causes of those challenges. If they're able to bring it, back down to almost a root level of what are the causes of some of the challenges the business is overcoming, that's going to help you understand that they're thinking more strategically than if they're responding in a way that is perhaps more on that technical level or a financial data level.
Great. A lot of good questions coming in. We'll see how many more we can get to here. The next question is establishing a relationship between the CFO and the board, which we talked about earlier. But ways of that a CEO can help to enable that the CFO and the board build a relationship through the onboarding process. So any thoughts or experiences there? So
I think I mentioned it as we were talking. that we try to have a very collaborative sort of onboarding process with the CFOs that we bring to our portfolio companies. And the onboarding is agreed upon, or sort of the, structure of the onboarding is agreed between the CEO, the board, and then working with the candidate through it and having touch points along the way really helps to just build that relationship. Also, as much as the board or the private equity can, and I know everyone says it, that we're a partner, but really try to show them that, not just to say that, right? Like to be open to questions, be open to provide them help when needed is very, very helpful in building that trust and just like being there for them. So they're not, afraid every time they see an email coming from a VP or an associate, but they're happy to see that and they're happy to have that collaboration.
I think that many times, just to Sagit build on that too, that it comes down to really the context of what is a CFO stepping into, what's the context and the situation a CFO is stepping into. And in many cases, I'm going to assume that the board or the sponsor has probably had some degree of a role or input in the selection process. But if they didn't, or even if it was a very limited input on that, I really look at that and think that that's a huge part of the CEO of helping to set them up for success and helping the CFO know what they're stepping into as they go and meet the board and build that relationship. And what I mean, for example, is I'm thinking in particular of a client that I was working with where the CEO came in ready to, describe all the plans for a turnaround. And while the business was in need of that in many ways, according to all the metrics, the board was really looking for somebody who wasn't going to rock the boat and who wasn't going to just create this big, upheaval. They wanted somebody who was going to improve performance and have, influence on that, but also someone who's going to kind of keep a steady, calm pace. And the CEO didn't really set the CFO up for that. And so the CFO came in very strong, saying, here's what we're going to do based on my past experience. We're going to do this. And immediately it felt like it set them up on the wrong foot in almost an adversarial way. So I personally would look at that and say, I think a lot of it comes down to the CEO being able to set the context and set the CFO up for success in building that relationship.
Adam, I just want to say, I think that is so critical. And I see that be a sticking point all the time, that the board has different expectations of the business and different ways of measuring success than the CEO, the management team. And it's just so important to get, especially for the CFO, to really understand that with conversations and alignment.
Thank you. Maybe just one more question here. I think this is a good one, and one that we see clients grapple with all the time. And the question is, how often do you see CFOs without correlating industry experience being hired? So I'll start on that one. It's a great question. I think, look, first, time to create value is short in private equity, right? And so somebody who has industry experience should be able to hit the ground running faster. And obviously, if you can find somebody who comes directly from the industry, that's usually desired. However, as we all know, non-competes are real, and they are there for a reason, and oftentimes hard to navigate. And certainly, I know it can be frustrating for boards and hiring committees when they say, well, why is it that we can't find somebody from our industry that is available now? And non-competes play a role in that. But I would say it goes back to what we talked about earlier, in that certainly we've seen great CFOs come in and drive all the value that is being desired, who come from an adjacent industry, right? But it really gets back to understanding, what is the playbook? What is it that we need this person to deliver? How are we going to go to create value? And has this person done that before? And do they understand the mechanism to do it? And oftentimes what we've seen, and CFO is a role where you do see transferable skills, right? Where you do see somebody who can be in one industry and go into another and be effective. So I do think it is important, but oftentimes there is strong talent that's in an adjacent industry that I think that could be deployed in a really effective way if the CEO and board and hiring committee is open to looking at an adjacent space. But I'm interested to hear the panel's viewpoint on this.
Especially in the same sector, like if you've got a manufacturing background or a retail background or consumer products, it helps. You know, you can go between industries within a sector, but trying to cross over can be harder.
That's right. If the business model is similar, even if it's even if the business that they're in is somewhat different, right? It makes that transition a little bit easier, a more likelihood of having success.
100%.
Yeah, I find that there's a lot of innovative possibilities that can come across sometimes by hiring outside of your particular sector, and you can bring in some great new innovative ideas that can really help, you know, create a spark in the business of how to do something differently or how to solve a problem from a unique perspective. So there's times where it can be really, really effective and very powerful. Conversely, like you were just saying, you can also bring somebody in who is really just way outside, you know, the industry, in which case them getting up to speed in the context can be really, really challenging. I do a lot of work in healthcare and have seen this where sometimes bringing in people who have a retail experience, you know, creates sort of that the need within the business for maybe some standardization or some processes that are going to help make the financials more predictable. But without that eagerness to learn or that willingness to roll up your sleeves and get in the field and understand, you know, healthcare is very, very different than when you go into a retail store. Even though the mechanics might be somewhat similar, but you have to understand things like patient experience, what's the physician dynamic, things like that. And Alice, like you were saying, if you're trying to go from manufacturing to something else, it can create too much of a learning gap where it's just too much of an uphill battle. So there's times where it can be really, really additive and innovative and spark new ideas. And then there's other times where it just creates too much of a learning gap and can actually slow things down.
Great. There are more questions here, but I know we're coming up on time. So I'm just going to thank the panel. So everyone, thank you so much for the discussion. It was very robust and I think very helpful. And thanks to everyone who attended. So we're appreciative of everyone's time.